So with that said, let's hit on Citrix first. So I'll be talking to Citrix, and Ozzy will be hitting on the Microsoft aspect here and video combos.
Yeah, and you've noticed we've color coded these all appropriately to the branding of who we're talking to.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of us on the color coding. That was pretty cool. So the first thing on the apps and desktop side is considered Azure only, and that's recently was Citrix Managed Desktops from Citrix. It got rebranded to Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Standard for Azure. So that's our first one, and then we'll be looking at the hybrid multi-cloud. And we say hybrid multi-cloud because using Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Service Advanced and Premium, you have the ability to do hybrid in the sense where you can have multiple resource locations, which we'll talk through today. So the first step is to talk about the architecture. So the first thing that people hear when they hear Citrix Cloud is Citrix is hosting their own workload. So we do have a lot of Microsoft folks on the call as well. So we just want to point this out that Citrix is not an infrastructure as a service company. They're not hosting your workload. So if that is some, a misconception that's out there, understand that's not the case. Citrix is more of a platform as a service, right? So they basically took a lot of the products that you've known through the years, things like virtual apps and desktops, Citrix ADC, the ADM for the management and monitoring capabilities of the ADCs, WEM, workspace environment management, et cetera. They created those as kind of microservices that are all running on this platform as a service known as Citrix, right? And then just what it's showing down here is there's the ability of choice. And that's a common theme I think you'll see with Citrix as we go through this. Again, for this folks that have been doing Citrix for a while, this is probably a familiar slide, but because there are folks that are just doing AVD on the call, we'll mention this and we'll talk through it very quickly. Traditional infrastructure on the left, you had to manage, monitor, and maintain delivery controllers. You have multi-site, you have obviously duplicates of this at each location. You had SQL you had to worry about, you had Studio, Director for monitoring, your licensing, Storefront for the access layer, Citrix ADCs, those are all individually managed, monitor, and maintained. And then you had what really matters to you, which is your VDAs, right? And your individual workload. So those always stayed on-prem. So what Citrix did is they kind of packaged that all up and they said, we're going to do CVAD service. We're going to basically take on the delivery controller piece, the SQL piece, the workspace layer, so Storefront goes away. Studio is going to be in the cloud, monitoring and licensing. And all you have to worry about is your VDAs. And that's what Citrix did. All you have to have is cloud connectors in your resource location. There are reasons why you still want to have, in some cases, Storefront and ADC. We can talk through that. We'll kind of weave that in through the presentation. But point is that kind of got greatly simplified there, which is pretty awesome. So when we talk specifically about the CVAD standard for Azure architecture, that's kind of there's a lot of things here that a lot of folks might not know, which was pretty cool when Citrix built this. They really wanted to build a turnkey DaaS solution where Citrix you can actually do a direct Azure purchase through the marketplace and actually stand up CVAD service for Azure standard. So what this looks like is you have basically your Citrix Cloud control plane over here, and then what you have on the right, basically, you can have a Citrix managed Azure tenant. So if you didn't know anything about Azure, you could have Citrix actually manage those VDAs, manage the cloud connector, and then basically the individual Azure components, and you can then peer those into, if you had your own Azure subscription with your own Active Directory, you could basically peer those in and not have to worry about managing and maintaining those pieces. You just worry about your image. So that's actually pretty neat and something specific to CVAD Azure for standard Azure implementation. And what's neat is when you look at kind of the features and functionalities of CVAD standard for Azure, as I mentioned before, it's built for simplicity. It's the only solution today from Citrix. Doesn't mean it won't be coming down the line, but that supports non-domain join. So Azure AD joined, non-domain join, basically VDAs. So there's maybe reasons you want to do that from a contractor perspective or whatnot. You have the ability to do that. It can actually peer into your on-prem locations. You can easily spin up an environment with site-to-site VPN, VNet peering if you have an existing subscription. You can use Citrix managed subscription. We'll look at the quick deploy wizard, Web Studio capabilities. So they actually took, if you've been a CVAD service customer for a long time, they essentially took the entire console and they made it HTML5, right? So you basically would log in through HTML5 and you get this 64-bit console. So over the course of the last 2 years, they've been building RESTful APIs, and now probably the last 3 to 6 months, it's all Web Studio now, which is pretty awesome. We'll take a look at that today. Citrix optimized images, we'll take a look at that as well. There's also optimized images directly from Citrix that you have access to. Basic monitoring is built in, which is pretty slick. Auto scaling and power management. And it's Azure only plus remote PC. Obviously, through the pandemic, through the last year, a lot of things changed. for a lot of people, a lot of organizations. Remote PC was an absolute stellar solution. That's where you can access your physical PCs at your location without VPN, putting the VDA directly on those physical PCs. You can actually do that with CVAD standard for Azure with a couple clicks. So that was a pretty nice add-on they did there. CVAD Advanced, what you're looking at there is basically, you know, the on top of that, what you saw before from an architecture standpoint is exactly the same thing for CVAD Advanced and Premium. Same thing from a platform as a service, same thing as a cloud connectors and resource locations. What changes is your features and functionalities. And so what we have here is WEM, Workspace Environment Management. Been around for a long time. They've greatly enhanced that since a couple years ago. You have resource management, so CPU memory optimization. Really did a great job on the security controls. So, you know, jailbreak protection. They just implemented a new feature for process hierarchy control. So to prevent the jailbreaking, privilege escalation, and general UEM controls are all part of WEM, which is pretty cool. So kind of environment lockdown and things like that. App layering's been there a while since the Unidesk purchase, but that's there. You can do layered images. That's another piece that you have there. And really the premium piece is the big add-ons there are really session recording. So if you are an organization that needs session recording, that's an add-on. Unfortunately, that's not an add-on for CVAD standard for Azure. Just WEM is an add-on. These other things can't be purchased as an add-on, or session recording can, but advanced monitoring can as well. So session recording basically is, you know, it records your session, both app and desktop. It's intelligent. You can pause and resume it based on triggers. You can have it auto trigger based on security events. That will all roll up into security analytics, which is an add-on. It has service desk integration into Monitor, or what used to be formerly Director. So that's really a nice solution and a nice add-on, not just for help desk and troubleshooting, but also for compliance capabilities. That's all built into the premium solution. And then advanced monitoring and alerting is built in. We can do advanced reporting and alerting. All features and functionalities, we only highlighted this, are basically on the QR code to the right. So if you scan that, it'll take you to a live dynamic matrix that's there. And the last thing is across the board, there's basically multi-factor across the board. You have bring your own identity. So with Workspace, as we'll show you here in a second, basically you can bring your own identity with SAML 2.0 that was just added into Workspace as a service. Workspace, again, is the evolution of Storefront, where it's all platform as a service inside of Citrix Cloud for accessing your environment. You log in through there. It has direct Azure AD and Okta integration. Service continuity is the evolution of localhost cache. They built a whole new solution for offline availability. It's tech preview right now. Those are the reasons why you still needed Storefront and ADCs on-prem. Service continuity is going to replace that. That's in tech preview today, only for Workspace app. Eventually, it'll support the web release. Gateway service. That's traditionally, if you need remote access into your Citrix environment, it basically required you to have a Citrix ADC. Now you can do a gateway as a service without touching anything but a radio button in your portal. You have remote access into your environment. That's pretty powerful. Auto scale and power management, which we'll talk through later. Federated also with a custom service that was built by Citrix. So one of the big things when you're dealing with a SAML authentication protocol is when you go to log into Windows, Windows doesn't understand SAML, so you get a double prompt for authentication, right? So Citrix created a fast service, which basically will hook into your PKI and mint a smart card on the fly, all seamless to the user. So you do get single sign-on with Okta, with Ping, with Duo, with Azure AD as identity providers into your environment. Again, this is a single site, multi-resource location. So one pane of glass for management. Multiple resource locations can be different cloud providers, can be different on-prem locations, and it's all seamless. HCX obviously is across the board. Citrix has been doubling down on their experience across the board for their remoting protocol for the last 30 years. That's their bread and butter. And then let me keep moving here. So before we get into demo time, I'm just going to pop into this through quickly here. So basically, this is what it looks like for standard for Azure and desktop service. You basically have a quick deploy and a web studio for CVAD standard for Azure. And then on the advanced service, you have full configuration. You'll notice user environment management. Quick deploy, we just did this for the sake of time. Basically, looks a little bit different. Doesn't look like your traditional console. You basically will have kind of your instance sizes. You'll have the different disk types, number of sessions per machine in your image there. If you go to desktops and apps, you'll just see your single desktop. You'll see your applications. You have no ability to do advanced delegation. Basically, everyone that's a subscriber sees all apps, again, because that's quick deploy. What's neat is they enabled Web Studio for Azure Standard, where you can do advanced delegation now. Subscribers is where you would subscribe. Machines, again, the concept of catalogs or delivery groups goes away. and they just have a single thing as a catalog to simplify things for people that aren't familiar with Citrix going forward. And then the last thing is power management is kind of built in that as what we're showing here, power and management. The monitoring is also built in, so you have full-on monitoring of your solution, so you can see kind of real-time sessions and failures and average logon duration. You can drill into each individual session and see metrics as well, like ICA latency, how long the session's been active for, what applications are running, and terminate processes if required. Licensing basically looks like this. So CVAD standard for Azure basically can be purchased yearly. Monthly is kind of a big one. That's the only one that can be purchased on a monthly basis as needed. So that's basically user device and concurrent, can be purchased directly for the Azure Marketplace, purchased via a partner or the Marketplace, allows for the use of the AVD entitlement. So Windows Virtual Desktop entitlement, Azure Virtual Desktop. Oz is going to talk about that here in a minute. Well, basically, so the CVAD standard advanced and premium basically is user device and CCU. It's subscription or yearly. This is the on-prem product. For those of you that don't know, perpetual licensing is going away, and it has gone away. You have for what you have, but any new net purchases are subscription-based going forward. So there is a transition to trade up to the CVAD service. There is no post 2003 CVAD release. There is no public cloud support. Sorry for the so there's no public cloud support. So basically, you have to be stuck on an earlier LTSR. But the whole point is that the cloud is constantly changing, and an LTSR release doesn't make sense because new things are constantly added into those services. You want to build those into things like Citrix machine creation services, image provisioning, etc. So we have the kind of the Yelp reviews here as far as $ signs, so you can kind of see what's expensive and what's not. The last thing here are pretty much the same for both of these, which basically is subscription. They're evergreen. You get to use the entitlement as well, but these are not monthly. That's kind of the big thing there. The last thing to basically talk about here, and I'll pop out just for 2 minutes to show you the console, because I want to get over to Oz. Basically, this is just an incredible slide that Citrix built to basically show kind of what the overall value add is in the Citrix Better Together partnership with Microsoft. Key thing here that I would just point out is choice, the ability to take on multiple clouds if you need to. Obviously, across all you need is a cloud connector in each of those locations. Multiple identity providers now with BYO for identity. Also, infrastructure is choice. Nutanix AHV, VMware, Hyper-V, Citrix Zenser, all those are possible. And then the add-ons that we talked about earlier around auto scale and session recording. So I'll just take a second here to just show this. Basically, this is the console once you go ahead and log in. So if you go ahead and log into the CVAD service, you basically see this here, which basically is all of the microservices that we talked about as part of the platform as a service. So we're going to obviously talk about virtual apps and desktops. Before we show that, I just want to show you what we're talking about with resource locations. So this is basically a resource location, again, is an entity or a data center or a cloud location, basically, which has cloud connectors, which are outbound only communication to the CVAD service platform. So you can see we have Azure East as well as our on-prem data center in there as resource locations. If you look at it from an identity perspective, you can see we have multiple avenues for identity: direct Okta integration, Active Directory, Azure AD, SAML 2.0. We have them connected across the board, so we can easily flip it back and forth. You have full-on advanced delegation of administration, which can be done here through that portal. The last thing second to last thing here is just showing you kind of workspace. You can come in here. External access is just as simple as coming in here, configuring connectivity, and clicking on the gateway service. And then basically you can obviously customize this, and then you can do authentication across the board. So you can see you can easily change your workspace authentication. Today we have it on Azure AD. Tomorrow it could be on Okta or SAML 2.0. And then the last thing I'll show here, which I think is important to show, is what is that? What does it look like, the new web portal experience in the CVAD service portal? If you go to Web Studio, you can see here that we have basically the hosting connections. So all the things that you're traditionally used to seeing on the on-prem product is here, but it's all web-based. If we go to add a new hosting connection, just to show you kind of that choice, just to show you that choice, the capability of choice here. When you click add connection here, what you'll actually see is all the different options that you have from a hypervisor perspective or a hosting perspective directly built in. You can see we have our two connections here. And I'll just quickly show this, just so, because Oz is going to show kind of the comparative to building a catalog in AVD as well as WVD, and then we'll wrap that up. So building a new catalog basically is a wizard-driven process. You choose multi-session or single session. In this case, we'll do multi-session. Multi-session, Oz will hit on it more, but multi-session is now the new Windows 10. You can do multiple users in Windows 10 only on Azure. So we'll choose Azure here so you can see comparatively. You can choose power managed or non-power managed. You go in and basically choose your master image. So in this case, that master image is just a VHD, a snapshot, or a managed disk. Once you go ahead and click that, what you'll do is you'll actually click the resource group, click the disk, and you'll be able to click through the additional steps here in the wizard. So going in on here, you can choose choice webinar, click next. And then this is key here. So they actually are, this is from a licensing perspective, a lot of people forget this, and this wizard takes care of it. Basically is setting the correct license. If you do have the AVD entitlement, you can check this box and it greatly decreases the cost for the compute because that's now consumed. It's not part of that compute license. It's something that you're already acquiring. You do premium, standard, or ACD here for the disks. You would just go ahead and choose the number of virtual machines you want to create. Choose the disk type here. You would choose your resource group, and then you would choose the computer account. It takes a minute here to go. Let's see here. I guess I got another minute here, so I can show this to you. I don't want to take up too much time because I want Oz to be able to go through all his good stuff. So it's just taking a minute. It takes a minute because we have our cloud connector. We're on the MSDN subscription, so we got limited compute. So I gave it just small resources. But anyways, you come in here and it'll show you all the resources within Azure. You would just pick the instance that you want. So if you do have an environment that is already set up, it will automatically say, hey, you already have catalogs that are these instance types. You'll choose your availability zone. So I'll let Oz talk more about that when he talks through the Nerdio components. You can actually have this go across multiple availability zones, which is pretty cool. You'll choose your disk type if you want to do cache to RAM or not. Cache to RAM is valuable. If you have a really IO intensive application, you can cache to RAM versus going to the actual disk and paying for that actual premium storage. You basically will choose your resource group or where you want all these newly created desktops to go. So from a scalability perspective, Citrix worked with Microsoft on this. So now you can do a resource group for each catalog. There's no longer a VM limitation per resource group. You're constrained by the actual limitations of Azure. So the last thing here is you just choose your naming scheme, testing, and that's it basically. The last thing here is just on auto scale. Just to let you know that that's built into the delivery group. You can come in here and basically choose your auto scale settings. That's all built in here from Citrix. But it's key to understand that Citrix is just doing powering on and powering off. It's not doing some of the other advanced things you might see here today. Monitoring is built in, which you guys kind of saw through the other solutions. So that's kind of what I wanted to show here. We won't go through the WEM components now. If we have time later, we can loop back to it. But again, this is kind of what the WEM console looks like. So wrapping this up, pros and cons, and then we'll hand it over here. So basically, pros, basically extremely flexible. I think you saw that through the point of choice here. You have multiple capabilities from a design perspective, active-active, active-passive, on-prem, hybrid scale into Azure, AWS. So I really love the options there. You have the ability to use Citrix Profile Management or use FS Logics or both, right? There's an ability to use combo there. You have apps, desktops, and then remote PC capabilities. Can be purchased through your partner yearly or monthly. It was kind of a nice option there. We talked about using the AVD entitlement, so you'll be able to do that. User experience, as we mentioned, like Citrix and remote access has been their DNA for 30 years. They've doubled down for sure on the protocol. A lot of great new things built in for adaptive transport, UDP, audio, things like that. They're all kind of built in the optimization packs. Extremely tight partnership where they extend the capabilities of AVD, which we'll talk through. And basic monitoring is built in. Cons, license complexity, right? With great options comes great complexity. We're here to help work through that, but there are some a la carte items where additional, so things like advanced security functionality, monitoring, et cetera, can be add-on. There's a ton of features, so potentially be shelfware, so it's important to really understand those use cases. And the last thing is just, uptime is dependent. CVAD service uptime is dependent specifically on the Azure architecture.